The increasing complexity of the world that we live in is having a profound impact on the relationship between businesses and customers. It seems that the more that customers and companies rely on algorithms and AI to run their businesses and assembly lines, the more abstract the world becomes for many people. With every instance of cyber theft and privacy theft, data theft that we see, it seems many people have the impression that their lives are being taken over by things they don't understand. That makes it even more important for people at the heart of organizations to demonstrate accountability for the data and privacy of their customers. There is a need to redefine what we mean by trust, and I'm delighted to host this panel where we can grapple with a lot of these issues. To my left is Charlotte Hogg, the CEO of Visa in Europe. To her left we have Abidali Neemuchwala, CEO of Wipro. To his left is Gowrappan, CEO of Verizon Media. And to his left is Mario Greco, the Group CEO of Zurich Insurance. Guru, perhaps I can start with you. The last few years have seen a big upsurge in controversy about how search and social media companies use their users' data. As a consumer-facing company that's home to brands like AOL and Yahoo, how big a challenge do you face in getting your clients to trust you?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me here. Set the context, Verizon Media, we serve about 900 million monthly active users today globally. TechCrunch, HuffPost, Yahoo, AOL, all these media assets are part of it. And we've been serving more than 25 years in terms of bringing these consumers. It's a much harder challenge today. Depends on which country you're coming from and where the consumers are coming from. For us, when you think about Verizon Media, trust and innovation are two core pillars that we operate by. And I'll tell you a couple of things that we've done.
Sure.
In last year. One, we got out of UGC. So one of the hardest part in the business to do, maintaining trust and validating data and validating who the customer is much harder in the UGC world. If you take social, take Facebook, we used to own an asset called Tumblr. We sold that late last year. That was part of the strategy saying we cannot be in the UGC business if you want to maintain a very deep trust in terms of customer engagement. Two, we recently launched something called OneSearch, which was again around privacy. Coming back to the world of what OneSearch does is think about this as a mission impossible task where you search and the search vanishes after you've done the search. Once you get the result, we don't sell that to marketers, no cookies, nothing is stored, essentially. So that's what customers or consumers are wanting these days, and we've gone deep into it. So I do think it's a harder challenge today. Companies have to make much more extra effort because if we purely focus on revenue and driving that, it doesn't go a long way. I think you want to build much deeper engagement, and we've taken a deep view on trust that way.
And how do you measure that?
Look, engagement
goes
up.
Yes.
I think engagement, at a very core level, you start measuring even NPS. When you look at a lot of engagement, we've seen that at Yahoo News. I'll give an example. Yahoo News today is the number one about CNN and other news assets today is number one, at least in the US, in terms of monthly active user base. And one of the things we did probably 18 months back, we said we're going to get out of all this third party, even we had a lot of UGC coming in, we want to get out of that. And in return, what happened, we've seen our engagement go up about 40%, because now it's called the most trusted place, where you can get a lot more engagement, but also we're getting sources, take Bloomberg to Fox, to any of them that can show up there, which customers trust already, right? So you're adding an extra layer of editorial in a way. What you're saying is when the engagement goes up, the eventual funnel is the revenue goes up, right? The key is you got to give time. When you start thinking short term, that doesn't work.
All right, let me turn to you now. It's a similar question, I suppose. There are a lot of worries and angst out there about how insurance companies could use people's lifestyle data, sort of data about how people live their lives, their health habits, their sporting habits, what have you. But the insurers could use this data when calculating premiums, essentially using personal data against their own clients. How difficult a task do you face? And does the business face, does the industry face in convincing its clients that this is not the case and this can't happen?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we have two different issues. One is to convince customers that privacy is the most important thing. The second, at the same time, is to convince customers that we use data for their own interest and not for any other reason than that. So as a company, we took a commitment some months ago, a public commitment, to protect the privacy of the customer's data and never use the customer data without the customers asking us to do that. And also, we took a commitment to demonstrate constantly to the customers that data are always used for their benefits. Now, if I can give you an example, think about what our job was years ago before we had Google Maps and what it is today. If you insure any property without Google Maps, you have no clue where the property is in the world. And so you have to average out the risks and the costs among everyone, which means that the higher risk people are subsidized by the lower risk people, by definition. Today, we can identify the specific risks of every location, and that's really for the benefit of the low-risk people, who are the vast majority in the world. The other thing which is true for us, but I believe is true for all industry, we don't store data. We only have to segment the risk and identify the risk. Once we have done that, of course, we discard everything because there is no reason and it's expensive to store, and no one in the world will store this data because you have no way to use it until you want to build the criminal business. Now, how to build trust? By taking commitments and by standing out on these commitments in the face of the customers. And of course, we know that this is about reputation. Trust and reputations are very close to each other. And we want to keep our reputation 150 years old and never miss it on our data commitment.
And again, how do you measure that? It's one thing to sort of come out with these pronouncements.
As Guru said,
what sort of benchmarks or measures do you use?
We do the same things. I mean, we track Net Promoter Score at every interaction we have with the customers. On data, I would say that, frankly, you have a higher stick or benchmark, because if you miss it once, it's not going to be a Net Promoter Score. It's going to be your reputation falling down, dramatically the morning after, everywhere in the world. So you really have an immediate measure of that. I mean, social media will give you an immediate return on that the day after. You can't afford that. That's why we had the courage to go with this data commitment out, and we stand out for this every day.
Thank you. Charlotte, let me turn to you. Politically, we live in an increasingly fragmented world. Different governments, different jurisdictions increasingly look at privacy and data privacy differently. From where you sit, where do you see the best global standards?
So I think at last count, there were about 80 different regimes around data that I looked at. And I think there's an increasing evolution in general from data privacy to data ethics. And if you look across those 80, the one that comes up still the most frequently is fairness, which is interesting. So as we sort of started on this journey with a privilege of being, global reputation, one of the best known consumer brands in the world, 3.4 billion accounts, what we knew is we had to start from who we were and what our purpose is, which is around consumers and individuals. And then we looked, as I think global companies can increasingly do across the world, to find the set that both reflect the mission of the institution and the geographies which you serve. And so the ones that we came up with were around security, which you'd expect from an organization like ours. Consumer control, which is at the heart of GDPR and some of the base level that's been rolled out in Europe. Fairness, as I said, the one that comes up the most and plays both to the technicality of how you use data as well as the outcomes. Accountability, so the levels of responsibility should be the same no matter how complex the algorithm. And that's, I think, one of the great elements that comes out of the Singaporean framework. And then value, being able to demonstrably draw a line between the data and how it actually benefits, in our case, the consumers, businesses, and economies that we serve.
And would you say you mentioned the Singaporean framework, would you say that's the one that ticks the most boxes?
Well, it ticks actually, it's only got 4 elements to it. It's feet.
And actually, maybe you could tell the audience a little bit about it, actually, because you told me about it when we talked before this panel. I had to look it up. I didn't know that much about it. So I think they did show the way in Asia Pacific, and you all will know more than I probably, but with a framework that I thought very much spoke to values and to how you think about the use of data rather than trying to treat it as sort of the 10 commandments. So the elements of FEAT are fairness, ethics, accountability, and transparency.
And you do see increasingly variations of that in all the other frameworks. You see it in some of the work that the Ethics Commission has done in Germany. You're seeing it with the ICO in the UK. And you see it now, I think, rolled out. And it's very simple. But again, I think many different organizations around the world and globally as companies, it's worth looking at that, at least as a starting point.
Yes. Now, Abidali, let me turn to you. Trust and accountability, of course, isn't just about cyber and algorithms and AI, et cetera. We talked a little bit before this panel about, when you look at news, for example, what comes out of Boeing, the recent crisis they're happening, and ethical issues that we see tied to self-driving cars or automated assembly lines. As technology becomes more and more integral to everything that business does, what solutions have you guys at Wipro come up with, or are you pursuing, to convince customers that humans really are in charge and business should be trusted?
So again, we're a B2B business here on the panel, which essentially is helping our enterprise customers maintain the trust of their consumers. And we're very fortunate to have these customers as our partners who trust us. So the element is both we being a trustworthy partner and then making sure that we enable trust within our enterprise customers. And the definition of trust, as you rightly mentioned, has expanded purely from just being cybersecurity and being safe and secure to data privacy, like Charlene very elegantly articulated, to safety. There is so much autonomy happening when there are autonomous cars, there are autonomous factories, which we help drive industrial robotics in factories. Accidents there is again a matter of trust, because workers and employees need to have trust in how they're using technology. And then artificial intelligence and machine learning, which is everywhere, which again creates aspects of transparency which need trust. And in each one of these areas, there is technology that is available. Just purely from a cybersecurity perspective as an example, while enterprises have always had very good point solutions to identify threats and vulnerabilities in their networks or in their end user equipment or in their data centers, but looking at it on a holistic basis and picking up signals and doing event correlation, where you can identify patterns and then be ready for it through about 18 cyber operation centers. We help our customers globally be trustworthy for their end consumers. A lot has been said about data privacy, and again, we help our customers having IT systems. Every business is today a technology business. So when you design the business, the products, it is designed for data privacy rather than having a layer on top of it, which ensures data privacy. So it is designed for, the example that Charlene gave of feet, or enabling all of that. Similarly, in industrial robotics and autonomy, which has a lot of artificial intelligence. A simple example for a bank or an insurance company. Although right now AI is being used to assist humans to take decisions, but the days are not far when you make a mortgage application and the AI algorithm actually decides whether you are approved for the mortgage or not. And to keep the trust of your consumer, you will have to, especially when you deny a mortgage, you will have to give specific reasons of why you deny. Now, static software, it would be relatively easy, but the interesting part of artificial intelligence and machine learning is it learns. So if, just as an example, if 5 years back there is data where certain consumers were approved for a mortgage, and if they were not able to repay the mortgage, the algorithm will learn by picking up certain patterns, and next time there is a good chance that those kind of consumers will be denied being given a mortgage. And now being able to create enough transparency as we code those algorithms, so that those algorithms not only take decisions, but they're also able to be a white box. They are able to go through and articulate in a log the steps that they took to deny a mortgage, so that a bank or an enterprise could then give a fair answer to its consumer as to why that was. It's a huge transparency issue. So it's not only about Google and Facebook, but every enterprise and every consumer who interacts with an enterprise will deal with artificial intelligence and machine learning and will need to have that kind of transparency. And similarly, as I said, autonomous cars, factories, you took the example of aircrafts having so much of AI. How some of these things work, and even from the news as we read, some of the simple things as you may put an additional software with AI, but just training a pilot on being able to understand what it is and what is the repercussion of that software in there is an issue of trust. And those are some of the things that we help our customers with.
Yeah, I want to get back to that issue of trust and bias in a moment, but one other question for you, if I may. Wipro, you're a global company, and this is another theme I want to tease out here. What differences do you see when you look at your global customer base between concepts of privacy and how important that is, and data security? We were talking, from your experience at Alibaba, China is very different to Europe. Maybe we can talk about that as well. But at Wipro, what sort of diversity and expectation do you see?
Again, for most enterprises, we are starting to see that trust overall is becoming a board agenda and a CEO agenda driven right from the top. I think issues around how you deal with, the transparency in which you deal with issues. Every 30 seconds, an enterprise is being attacked somewhere in the globe. There is data of, one record is being lost every millisecond somewhere. So the need for transparency in terms of how you deal with a situation like that when it happens. Consumers are starting to understand, at least businesses are starting to understand that you're going to be attacked once in your lifetime. And one of the cybersecurity experts said there are only two kinds of companies: those who are being attacked and those who don't know that they are being attacked. So the idea is, again, how do you come out with a high level of transparency? And we see some variation in there, and I think we're all learning together in being able to do a better job at that.
Guru, you're a very, very consumer-facing business, and you have worked in China. What sort of differences?
Yeah. Look, I mean,
presumably huge ones.
Yeah, it's if you think about trust and privacy, at least on the consumer internet side, a lot of these things started happening when Cambridge Analytica started. I mean, if you think about the whole privacy issue, consumer didn't talk about this first. Cambridge Analytica actually started with a company, the government got involved. Now the consumers understand the common baseline globally. So if I take 4 years back, I think we had different standards in many ways, right? I was trying to see if there was data around, you take a GDP per capita correlation on a lot of these countries and privacy, you will see a difference. If you start thinking about more developed countries, in many ways, the privacy, understanding of privacy is different, and definition of privacy is different, or trust is different. The biggest difference is transparency and value exchange. Start going to markets, take India, China, Southeast Asia. A lot of times, it's not like, there is less privacy or less trust when you're building, at least on the internet product side. But the bigger difference is what value are you getting out of it, right? If the biggest mistakes companies do many times is you don't share transparently what you're going to do with the data. If you're transparent about it, saying, hey, this is the reason I'm taking the data, and you're going to get XYZ offer or better deal or whatever it is, part of that value exchange, then you're giving a clear indication to the customers. When you don't do that, you use the data to do something else, which is not part of the value exchange you agreed, then you start going in two different paths. So I think today we now finally feel at least there is a spectrum of better common definition globally, but markets where you have a massive mobile adoption, massive internet adoption, and people are spending 5-6 hours on internet, their value exchange is much higher, and consumers are willing to share a lot of data because they know they're going to get more out of it, right? I think what Cambridge Analytica and post that era, what it did is really restricted that in a way, saying, hey, do I share more? Because you're actually sharing a lot of data without asking my permission. And the challenge is in user experience. When you see a massive terms of service or a thing that shows up, which is 20 pages, nobody's expecting, it's not fair for consumers to understand. So that's what we're trying to do. How do you simplify that? How do you make sure you're honest about the value exchange and telling them? Now, in cases where it's premium product, when you're charging consumers saying, hey, pay for a subscription, pay for this service, you know for sure that data, whatever you do with that is very clearly safe, and that's the only reason you're using for. So I think there is a spectrum. I do think it's become more common now, given everything that's happened last 3 years. And what we try to do is we try to bring the best standard. What do we do in the US? Europe, of course, GDPR. In US, you have California CCPA now launched, which is live, again, around where data can be shared. So a lot of those things we try to apply globally so that we see every user with the same lens. There is no difference.
Charlotte, I'd like to pick up again this idea of bias and the risk of bias in algorithms. I mean, in Europe, recently, it was a few months ago, Goldman and Apple got into this controversy about how, I think it was Goldman allegedly, its algorithm rejected a husband and a wife who had exactly the same income, rejected the wife and accepted the husband, or gave the wife a better deal than the husband. And there was a big controversy, and Goldman apologized and fixed it. How much do you worry about that in your business?
Well, that's why at least one of our values is fairness. Someone said to me recently, which I thought was a great analogy, when the knife was invented, that was a heck of an innovation.
Yeah.
But it can be used in a multiple of ways. It's quite useful in the kitchen, really bad on the streets.
Depends how you use it.
Depends how you use it.
Yeah.
And knowing the values for how you're going to use it and being able to communicate them, and equally recognizing that we all have biases of different kinds. And that will go into what data sets even we choose to put into a particular model, is a really important starting point. So if you have as one of your values fairness, and then you look hard, as you were describing, at the outcomes, and by the way, you build a more diverse workforce so that they look at different data sets and they look at the outcomes a little bit differently. Because in perhaps an old world, well, I could imagine an old world, 2 people who had applied for a mortgage, and yes, the man would have got it. If you have more people in your organization who are saying, hang on a second, that's a bit odd, isn't it? You start to get a very different engagement. So there's bias in the data that goes in, there's potentially bias in how the algorithms work, and there's bias in what the outcomes are. And having the accountability that sits around it and a diverse workforce that covers many countries, I think helps you to spot those and continually course correct and question and challenge, which is where the people plus the systems, I think, become really important.
And again, I come back to this question of measurement. How do you measure progress in that?
I mean, you can always measure the improvement of the data you put in, the quality of the data you put in, and the outcomes.
But it's a qualitative question. Like, is my algorithm more or less biased than it was before?
I think the tools do allow you to begin to say, are the outcomes better or worse? There's quite a lot of techniques that allow you to get into that.
And Mario, I mean, it's a very similar question for you. What sort of controls have you put in place to prevent those sorts of outcomes?
Yeah, we do have a number of controls on our algorithms to avoid the price, for example, differentiate on the wrong reasons. So we need to differentiate on risks and on nothing else than that. And we keep controlling, centrally the algorithms that we use. But most importantly, and again, the best control is the market. If we lose a customer, we always go to the customer and ask this customer, why have we lost the customer? And if it is bad service, we want to learn from that. But if it is bad pricing, then we want to change it right away. And the most expensive thing for us is customer acquisition. In our industry, this is the worst that you can have, is that you go into a continuous drain where you lose customers and you acquire customers back. And so you've got to build your business on retention, loyalty, and high customer service. And this is what we've been doing. I mean, we pay our employees, our people, based on customer satisfaction and employee satisfaction. Because, by the way, the two things go together. You can't have a satisfied customer if you don't have an employee who is equally happy and satisfied with what he or she is doing. And so 40% of the remuneration that we give to our managers is based on customers and employee satisfaction, measured objectively by external companies.
The final topic I'd like to touch on is retraining and reskilling. And perhaps, Abidali, this is one for you. I read somewhere that half of India's 4 million tech workers will need to be retrained in the next few years, or risk becoming redundant. I don't know, do you agree with that or not? And if so, how are companies like Wipro addressing them?
Oh, absolutely. I think it is true for all companies across the globe where there are things that earlier humans could do, which now technology, especially all of the automation technology, can do better. And there are other things other opportunities that are opening up, and it needs investment in employees and reskilling. Just as a data point for Wipro, we've been a very successful company, but we started with a global talent model which was called labor cost arbitrage. Today, that whole model is moving to automation arbitrage. And that needs reskilling of the people, because the lowest end of the pyramid is now all getting automated. The work doesn't need people to do it. And but at the same time, there are areas like programming in artificial intelligence and writing algorithms that we talked about. Data science and looking at data sets is becoming an area where we don't have enough talent. I could double my data scientists and have work for all of them, but I don't have enough. So we're reskilling. We've already reskilled out of Wipro's 180,000 employees, about 138,000 employees on various digital technologies that they could choose. We've created a platform which enables them to actually create use cases so that they learn by experience. And as an organization, we facilitate that, rather we make that available even through some of the industry, the NASSCOM, which is the industry association, to be able to make it available across a larger set of employees who could, if they want, get themselves reskilled. Because we do believe that giving an opportunity for people to reskill, especially who are in jobs which are going to get redundant, is a fair practice that every business needs to encourage.
Guru, is that something you'd like to get in on as well?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think every industry is going to go through, next 5 years alone, there is going to be disruption in every industry, you name it. For us, how we create content is changing. We talked about AI. I think AI, in my view, needs to be regulated more. I think that's one that's left alone. But the bigger thing, we are training, we're doing a lot of bias training, right? That's a big part. I don't think employers do enough. And that's part of reskilling in many ways, where today you're coming in, we serve a global audience. How do I make sure what we build, let's say our algorithms, our ad systems, our targeting engines, really serves everything globally? But then you have most of the work is being done in the US today for us. That doesn't help. So what we're trying to do is, of course, building teams globally, that's one, but also training them on the common systems. A lot of automation is happening, so of course it's removing a lot of layers below, but the key is then you're working on the next layer up. So Verizon as overall, we employ close to 140,000 employees. That'll be a big chunk of it in terms of retraining, reskilling, but also on the Verizon media side, I see this as a big priority.
Charlotte, did you want to get in on that? Or?
I think what I wanted to add is I think there are things we all do in terms of our values that go externally. So Visa's mission is to connect the world through the most secure, resilient, innovative network, enabling consumers, businesses, and economies to thrive. Now, I say the business bit particularly, because the great promise of a digital world is that people can sell beyond their own borders. It was when coins were developed, you could go beyond your village. Now we've got electronic payments globally. Small businesses are the engine of employment in any economy. So helping them move into a digital age, making it simpler for it, making them more convenient, allowing them to do what they're going to do, is, I think, as important as anything else, because it's going to create the employment of the future. And so, yes, we need to do some reskilling, but we also have to enable the people who exist today and make them successful in what is a digital age.
Great. Well, on that note, thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for joining the panel. A special thank you to Wipro. And we will have a drinks and food networking session here at the back of the room, so please stay around for that. I believe there's an app as well, so if you have any feedback about the session, please let us know. We always want to do better. Let us know your thoughts. And thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the week.